Hi, everyone. It is David March here again for another episode of the Growth Mindset Podcast. Always happy here to talk to different guests and different professions, different expertise. As you know, I am the owner of Innovative Marketing Solutions. We do marketing for all different types of businesses. And in my background, I've done a lot of recruiting. So today we have a special treat here. The name is Matt Russell. Matt, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit?
Yep. Yeah. First off, thanks for having me, David, and great to reconnect. So Matt Russell, based in Charlotte, kind of recently come to the dark side of executive recruiting. I spent 25 years in global HR executive jobs for large multinational private equity companies. Worked for some great brands in the industrial CPG manufacturing space. Had some a great, very good career, worked for some great companies, worked for some great leaders, learned what good looks like. Some cases learned what bad looks like. Was able to you live abroad, live in Hong Kong, so I have that perspective, which really opened my eyes to a lot of different things. But yeah, that's just me on the professional side. Personally, wife, married, two kids. Who probably my greatest achievement. I've got two kids who are contributing members of society, which is what you ask for as a parent. So,
Always good. Always good.
yep,
That's fantastic. And you've had a long career within HR, and doing a lot of onboarding and definitely going through all the different sections of HR, right?
yep. Yeah.
It's,
So yeah, I
it,
mean, I'm more of a generalist by trade. I didn't grow up doing total rewards or doing performance and talent management or doing talent acquisition. I lived in a business that those were all center led, but I learned what good looks like, and kind of went out on my own at the end of 2024, started my own HR consulting company because I felt like I had one, a very strong network, and two, I knew, kind of how the HR function needed to interact and live within a business and work strategically with the business depending on the needs and the strategy and the growth of the business. So whether it's, and I kind of look at HR in three buckets: attract, develop, and retain. Everything you really need to do from an HR perspective lives in one of those three buckets. So, and I've always got a saying like HR is not rocket science. You treat people like you want to be treated. And the only joke I make is all my buddies just think I do, Taco Tuesday and birthday cakes. They do that
yeah.
more just to bust my chops. But HR is the job that nobody knows what we do, but nobody wants to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, and with HR, I think the big thing right now is keeping the human in HR, keep human to
Yeah,
human and human resources, because a lot of times what we're seeing now in 2026 is trying to bring in a lot of technology, trying to bring a lot of AI and all these different things in there, and it's doesn't work because the AI is not human. It's
yeah.
just not human.
Without a doubt. I mean, I do a lot of networking. I just always have. I just feel like in HR, if you're not networking with people outside of your job, to bring talent into an organization, you're not truly in HR. And obviously, as a being an executive recruiting now, I get a lot of requests, to meet people or get their resumes and hey, I'm looking for a job. And if they're in Charlotte or even if they're not in Charlotte, I always 10 times out of 10, I'll go grab breakfast or lunch with somebody. I may not have a job for them, but I at least want to put my eyes and ears and start to vet them out. But I was talking to an individual this morning. That's one thing we are talking about is just the AI. I actually talked about it with a candidate, somebody this morning, and then a candidate that I'm looking for a search and helping him with just giving him feedback on his resume. Because there is either AI is looking at the resume and kicking you out of the system, or there's somebody on the other end who may not have the experience to understand what your job truly does. So you've got to bring the human element into that. You've got to actively apply for jobs. You've got to go find the people who are decision makers on LinkedIn. Whether they're the head of talent acquisition, or they're the recruiter, or they're in HR, or they're the VP of the function that you want to go to work in. Go connect with that person. Tell them what you've done. Say, hey, I'd love to go get breakfast, lunch. Grab a beer, coffee, whatever it is, because you do those simple steps. You're already you're already had 98% of anybody who's applying for that job because it's just, people are just kind of going through the motions. In a lot of cases, they're just hit apply, easy apply, easy
Yep.
apply.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'll have VP of finance search and, I'll get somebody who's, working, as a cashier at Taco Bell apply for the job, that
Yeah.
they,
No,
cause
I mean,
they're not putting thought into it.
I remember when I was recruiting, we would have these roles up, and like the role was like a sales engineer or something like that, and there's a dentist that
Yeah,
applied to it. I'm like, you know, I mean, you hardly even talk to people. Like, what do
right.
you
Yep.
mean? You're just the person's
Yeah,
mouth is
it's
open most of the time. They're not speaking to you. Like,
right. Yeah, but it's amazing. I mean, but I talked to a candidate today that I don't think they'll move forward with the process, but I sat and spent the last 15 minutes kind of giving him suggestions on his resume, and saying, "Hey, I would fix this." Like, and he had supposedly had a professional look at his resume before, and there were some glaring errors on it. So, like any chance I can do to help, folks, I do. I enjoy that aspect of my way to get back. I've just been, like I said, been fortunate to learn from some good companies and learn from great people.
yeah, totally. And one of the big things I think that's a big opportunity for people within the recruiting and like HR function is beyond the actual recruiting. Beyond the actual recruiting, like after we find the candidate, we source them, everyone says this guy is cool. Bringing them on board to that company, sometimes it isn't a smooth transition, number
Yeah,
one. And number two, sometimes the company there isn't prepared to actually bring that person on. They don't have an onboarding process, or they don't feel really welcomed there, or they're just not really working. Like some people come in, they want to work, and then they're just sitting around. What do you want me to do? Like kind of thing.
yeah. Well, yeah, I've always said, people that worked with me and work for me from an HR perspective, and I'll tie onboarding into this, but to me, employee engagement starts from the time that somebody engages the at that point in time an applicant, right? How's the recruiting process? How do they represent the company? Whether it's the hiring manager, whether it's somebody in HR, whether it's somebody in talent acquisition, or it's somebody in search. That's when the employee engagement experience starts for a prospective employee. And then you have to onboard them. And that's, where, I don't know what the stats are. I'm not a huge stats person, but you lose people in the first few weeks, whether they're engaged. And it's something as simple as, do they have their computer? Do they have their cell phone? Do they know where the bathroom is? And how do they get onboarded? What's this company I joined? So, like that's one of the things that, and now, if I take my hat off from a search perspective, pretty much every search we do a lot of retained searches. And with a retained search and a contingent, there's a guarantee, meaning, hey, the person we're going to put in here is here for the next 6 months or whatever. We got to make sure that, I want to make sure that the individual we put in there is set up for success. So, and that's kind of what makes us a little bit different at Carnegie, where we've got some subject matter expertise in myself, who's worked in global jobs, and we can say, hey, as part of your retained firm, look, you need some help. You've said it, like we don't have an onboarding process. It behooves me as an executive recruiter to sit and spend time with the HR person who's fairly junior in their experience, to say, hey, this is let's put together an onboarding. Let's make sure your leadership team and the managers are on board with it. They understand it. So when we fill the role, that person is set up for success, and that's a repeatable process that you guys can follow. And then, if we the more searches we do, we can tackle other projects. And then I can just, especially these small to mid-tier companies who typically will have, somebody in finance doing HR or the office manager doing HR, that, you can provide some level of expertise as both a recruiter, but also HR. So it's
Yeah.
really helping. It's allowing us to be successful as a search firm, but also the company doing it. And again, that's kind of what gives us an advantage. We've got some subject matter expertise of somebody who's been there, done that, which isn't the case in those small boutique firms.
Yeah, and end of the day, what we're really talking about here is being proactive, having some proactive kind of leadership,
Yep.
even if that leadership isn't present at the company that this candidate is going to, you have the understanding of what is supposed to be happening, so you can proactively educate, train, or communicate simply, hey, this is the things that, I suspect you're going to have.
Yeah.
Do you have them? Like,
And if you don't, like, let's sit down and build it. Yeah, and it also helps us level set the candidates' expectations too. Say, hey, they don't have a great onboarding process, but hey, just so you know, we're not only filling the search, but we're also helping them build out what their onboarding process looks. They'd be like, okay, because to me, if somebody understands that they have a problem, the first thing you got to do is acknowledge that you have a problem. And if companies do that and they say, and they admit it, okay, that to me, that's step one. You can't sit there and be an ostrich and have your head in the sand and think, we're best in class and everything when your turnovers, 50%, employee engagements, 30%. No, you're not best in class. You got work to do. And those companies that understand, like, hey, we can get better. In a lot of cases, they're sometimes hiring that person because they have those gaps and they need to fill those gaps, so they understand that.
Yeah, I mean, when we think about some of like the failures or the lessons that can be learned, from these situations, what are some that come to mind for you where, yeah, you didn't have
Yeah.
that in place? Yeah,
To me, failures are obviously they're ways to learn. Like everything, every time you fail, you learn something. Now,
yeah.
the problem
In
is
fact,
if you
in the startup culture and in the innovation culture, one of the biggest things they people say is fail fast, fail
yeah.
often. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, and you got to me, working in a company where you're allowed to fail is those are great companies. Now, obviously, you repeat the same failure, 15 times. It might not be the company, it's probably you, but, I mean, it's failures in the business world. I don't know if I can count how many times, it is, making bad hires and holding on to them too long. I did that very early in my career, but to me, the best leaders are the ones that when you screw up, you go, you make changes. When I'm interviewing people and I say, hey, when you get to a certain level, senior manager, director, VP, I'm like, hey, have you ever fired anybody? No, I had, employee that, wasn't performing, but we moved them over into accounts payable. Okay. Like you're avoiding the tough conversation. And companies they have to get better at having big girl conversations. So, it's funny when I kind of looked at, think of this question, I go back to a personal experience and it's way back in my, early days. It's not really business related, but it really kind of set the tone for me, at a young age. And it was on the baseball field. It was my senior year of high school and what ended up being my last game ever pitched. And we were in our conference tournament. I pitched 11 and two-thirds innings. I gave up a home run, walk-off home run, and we lose the game. I took my hat from the mound and threw it to the dugout. And I was fortunate enough to play baseball in college, but I was not recruited, heavy at all. And as soon as I threw the hat, I said to myself, okay, if there's any college coaches in the stands, they're going to look at me and say, great arm, crappy attitude. And literally at that moment in time, I realized like, okay, like you're an example, you got to make sure that you are holding yourself to a higher standard. And it just kind of set the lesson for me of how to act and put myself together, so to speak.
Yeah, which is key because I mean, look, at the end of the day, challenges are going to arise, right? And that's just the way life is.
Yeah.
It's not that challenges arise; it's how you deal with the challenges, right?
Yeah. And it's, if I can think of from a business perspective, it's look, there's some things that you're very good at and you're very comfortable. Like, hey, I can do that. I can knock it out. But there's some things you put off, like because you don't want to have the difficult conversation. You don't want to, negotiate with that vendor. You don't want to go to your boss with something. And I've done that more than I care to remember. But I just know that I always remember I could put it off for a day or two or three or a week or sometime months on stuff, depending on the topic. And then you go have the conversation. You're like, crap, that wasn't that bad. Why did I stress about it for
It
the
wasn't
last 2 weeks?
that
Right. But that's a hard lesson to learn. And
that's
you know,
huge. Yeah,
yeah, it entails, making sure you got confidence and you know your stuff, first and
and
foremost.
yeah, but more than that, it's the internal dialogue that you think is going to happen, which
Yeah.
probably never happens.
Oh yeah. It's funny. Like when it comes to terminations, in fact, I was helping a buddy on the side and he owns a small little business and he called me up. I mean, he and I talk maybe once a year. We'll see each other at football games and such. He's like, hey, I got this employee. Here's the situation. And so I'm like, dude, you gotta fire her. And we're getting off. I said, you know, I said, I guarantee you, this is you think on the surface, this is going to be one of those conversations that is just going to blow up. Like all hell's going to break loose. And I told him,
Yeah.
I said, that's what you think, but I guarantee you this will probably be the easiest termination you will have ever done in your life. It's going to be relief to them because they know that the gauntlet's hanging over their head. And he did it that afternoon or the next morning, called me up. He's like, holy crap, you were right. He's like, she didn't, she's like acknowledged it. She picked up her stuff, she left professionally and boom, walked out. I'm like, yep. I mean, that's the worst, it's the worst feeling thinking like, I mean, I've had situations where, all right, let's bring the cops in. Like we at least have to have a cop sitting in the parking lot and the person goes out, perfect, so you just never know.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's talking about the internal game, talking about all the mental stuff because that's a big part of recruiting too. And I know that the CEO, that Mike's probably talking about that once or twice too, because
Yep.
especially when you're doing business development, especially if you're doing any kind of cold calling, that can you can easily get in your head, and you can
Yeah.
easily start having that internal dialogue, which is probably never going to happen.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, look, it's at the end of the day, and the separation I'm trying to make is, they consider, I'm kind of looking out there, they all consider themselves sales. I don't consider myself sales yet, but, just because it's hard to teach an old dog to do tricks on some regards, but it's a numbers game. Like you're going to call 100 people and you're going to get hung up on, or nobody's going to call you back. But it takes those one, two, or three, calling you back. And that's what it's all about. And those turn into great relationships and great business opportunities.
Yeah, totally. So, I mean, it's a lot. I guess it's a lot. In some ways, it's warmer, but in some ways, it's worse. When you're working with HR, right? Because it's like,
Yeah.
well, in some ways, it's like this isn't just like someone I don't know. This is a complete cold conversation, But it's like I don't know if that's even bad or worse or indifferent or what it is, because it's like, well, this person, so maybe it's easier or maybe it's not easier because you don't
Yeah.
know them. It's like,
Yeah. No, I mean, you're selling yourself. I mean, on a lot of things, you're selling how this company is different. They go about how they search. We're not AI intense by any stretch of imagination. We're more direct and really kind of our job is to find the people that don't want to be found, right? And the good people and put them in a good situation or better situation in some cases. So yeah, it's selling yourself and what you provide to the client, but what does the company provide as well?
yeah, yeah. So moving over back to the leadership conversation, because it's always a fun one.
Yep,
And I've always found leadership is almost more about the environment that you're creating.
yep,
Some people call it the culture, but if you're creating an environment of, you know, let's say that take more the negative side first before we go to the more the positive side. You're on like a hairpin trigger, and you're ready to yell every time someone gives you an idea. That's creating an environment where if I bring this idea up, I'm just probably gonna get yelled at again.
right. Yep. Yeah, I mean, it's the last company I worked for in the I'll call it corporate America. When I was interviewing, I knew the CEO, he knew me, and he made the offer. He's like, "Hey, the title's VP of People and Culture." I said, "Peg, that's fine." I said, "I'll take your offer on when," he kind of said that. And then, the next morning we are kind of talking through the details. And I said, "I'll take the job on one condition." He said, "What's that?" I said, "You don't call me culture." I said, "I don't own culture." And everybody thinks HR owns culture. Are we a big part of it? Absolutely we are. So is the CFO, so is the VP of marketing, so is the sales leader, the operations supply chain, but it starts with the CEO. I can do all the things I want to do from an employee engagement perspective. We can have benefits that rock. We can have, great 401k contributions. We can have all the amenities in the office of free food, free drinks, all that good stuff. But if you got a CEO, or a business that lacks direction, lacks strategy, lacks engagement, at the top, the very most senior level, and you've got somebody who's a quick trigger, it's all for naught. all the work that's done underneath. So, yeah, I don't care what we call you. It's like, so I want to be a chief HR officer. It was a publicly traded company, and when I left there, our engagement score was 88%, and that was 98%. Participation rate again amongst 500 employees in Asia, in China, Australia, Middle East, U.S. And we did a lot of different things, and it's some of them just basic blocking and tackling, and not huge investments, but to me, when you talk about leadership, and I would always, when people ask the companies I work for, I've been fortunate and I've worked for great companies where I learned great things. I've also learned how not to do things, but that's everywhere. And people would ask me to describe the culture, and I said, you can challenge each other from 8 to 5 and go have a beer after work. And to me, that is a kind of a utopia culture because that meant that an associate product manager can be sitting in a product development room meeting and the CEO challenges that associate product manager, which is a very junior position, and the associate product manager can give it right back and know that there's no repercussions. That's the kind of environment you want to create, and you got to be a genuine, you got to be authentic. Like that's just those are table stakes. And it's I often think that what I call rank and file, people who aren't on the leadership team, a lot of times, C-suite will get up there and they'll present, the quarterly town hall or the business results, and they'll put all the smoke and mirrors and all the pretty pictures and everything like that. I think sometimes we think that the rank and file doesn't see through that. They see when people are genuine and when they can call their bluff.
Yeah.
So as the HR leader, you got to make sure that you're going behind that CEO and saying, "Hey, like you said this is how it landed. Like it fell flat." And like, let's make this is what we got to do behind it. So, the best leaders I've worked with, and I've worked with a ton. The genuineness and authenticity is number one. You can still be hard. Like there's no reason you can't come down on somebody. It's how you come down on them. But I go to what I said earlier, you got to create that environment where people are not afraid to make mistakes.
Yeah. No, 100%. And, I've had
Yeah.
these conversations with a lot of people, and the words I like to use, and these are the words I use. Some people don't say these same words, but they do it. And in terms of
Right.
then this is more on the positive side, right? It's creating an environment of psychological safety. That
Yep.
they psychologically feel safe to share an idea. They can feel safe to be vulnerable and know that it's not going to be used to manipulate them or control
Yep.
them or some adverse reaction. They don't feel that psychologically they should feel safe to
To
express
speak up.
themselves, speak up.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, when I hire people, whether it's for a lot in my team, but also in others, I want people who have an opinion. Like, and I will always have a strong opinion. I mean, but it comes from experience. It doesn't come from a place of arrogance. But I want people who I don't know everything. I don't want to know everything. I'm going to have an idea on something. I want you to have just as strong as idea on something. And if you don't, that's okay. But I want you to poke holes in what I'm thinking. And I just it's ping pong, to a degree. Now you can't play ping pong for on a subject for 3 months. Like you got to make some decisions, but
Yeah,
that's important. That's how you learn. And that's especially if somebody's more junior. I don't care if you just got out of school and you work on my team. Like you've got experiences. You're okay. How was the how was the onboarding process? Tell me what worked. Tell me what didn't work. And don't tell me you don't have opinion because you just went through it. Now they may not have the experiences of other companies, going through, but at some point in time they probably did. So making sure that I love that. Like that's, my wife would probably tell you I'm pretty combative. Like I'll find an argument for the sake of finding an argument. But like in the business world, it's like, okay, how do we get better? Like and how do we challenge each other? So I think that's fun. And people got to know that up front. They got to know that you got that space to do that.
yeah. Yeah, and as they say, it's like iron sharpens iron. I think it's like
Yeah.
a saying they say again. And that's kind of it's almost a fine line too, because I mean, in in coaching, you would say, how much do you want me to challenge you? You know,
Yeah.
so that it's like a fine line. That we're on some kind of level here.
Yeah. I mean, it's situational leadership, right? I mean, you got to
Situational,
know
yeah.
Yep, you gotta know which buttons you can push on which people, and, yeah, I use kind of a football analogy. You know, take I'll take a Carolina Panthers because I'm in Charlotte, but, if you take if Luke Kuechly, misses 5 tackles in a game, Ron Rivera, who's the coach at the time, when Luke Kuechly's running out, back on or onto the sideline, I guarantee you Ron Rivera's probably, grabbing him by the face mask and, ripping him a new one. That gets Luke fired up. He probably goes makes 5 interceptions and 15 tackles. Now
Exactly.
you take the quarterback who might be a little bit, not as tough. I don't mean that, but like, hey, he just threw 5 interceptions. The coach is probably going to wait for him to go sit on the bench. He's going to put his arm around him and say, "Hey, Jake, we're wearing white. They're wearing black. Throw to the team wearing the white uniforms." He's not embarrassing them. He's not, 72,000 people aren't seeing this, maybe a little bit sitting behind, but like he knows those personalities, knows what buttons to push. And, that's I love coaching, I love mentoring, and I love, that's situational leadership comes into a lot of that.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that. Yeah, it's an important point.
Yeah.
And something not many people have the sensitivity to understand. I feel.
Yeah. I mean, you got to know your people. I mean, you got to know what makes them tick. I mean, do you have to be best friends with them? No, you don't. Is it, but you got to know kind of what they want to do, what they want to be, what they grow up. What are their strengths? What are their areas of opportunity? And like I said earlier, like people have to get good at having big boy and big girl conversations. I mean, I'll go to another baseball example. Like if I was pitching and I came in the sixth inning with man on second and third and one out, I had one job and one job only. That's to strike the next guy out or get the next guy out. If I didn't do that, there's 2 guys in the bullpen. One of them was coming to get me. And there's no more immediate feedback than that. That could have been on Tuesday. I could show up on Saturday in the same situation in the 7th inning, and I could strike the next 2 guys, and all of a sudden you're a hero. So you got to be able to, you got to be able to take the feedback, but you also have to be able to, managers and leaders have to be able to give the feedback. I always say it's always in the delivery. Like, you can walk into my office, you can smell like a dozen roses. I can have you walking out of there thinking the total opposite. It's all in how and vice versa. You can stink like you know what. I can have you walking out of there thinking you smell like a dozen roses. It's all in how I deliver the message, and you're gonna know if it's authentic and genuine.
Yeah, totally,
So,
totally. Well, yeah. I mean, well, I appreciate your time here, Matt,
yep,
as a guest on this. As we, get to the end of this podcast episode, which has been quite enjoyable.
yep.
There's what I always say is, is there any kind of books or any kind of, a podcast or anything else that has influenced or get you any ideas before we close here for this podcast episode?
Shameful to say I'm not a hu like, if I'm reading books, it's sports biography, about,
Hmm.
like John Wooden. John Wooden, I love the books that's been written about him and that he's written, about leadership and pyramid of success and all that good stuff. But, I'm not a if it is podcast, it's more sports, related.
Oh, sports,
I
yeah.
love sports, because
Yeah.
sports has taught me so much, and I pulled so much out of it, and it's given me
Mhm.
a lot. But, so unfortunately, nope. No,
Okay.
but for me, I'm a big country music guy, and to me, there's a lot of life lessons in country music, and it's genuine, it's authentic, but I pull a lot of that, and how do I relate that to how I am and those types of things. So, and how do I carry myself? And, it's funny. I think I saw something where it's like if you want to, something about country music and just, it's like the worst music. If you want to pick up your spirits, obviously country music's the last thing you want to listen to because it's, about, my dog dying and, something else. So, but yeah, I love it. I just think they're, for the most part, genuine, not that aren't other artists aren't, but they're pretty genuine human beings and kind of telling their life stories and through music and in some cases, real life examples. So,
Totally. Yeah. Well,
yeah.
thanks again. If someone wants to reach out to you, someone wants to
Yep.
find more information, more about you, how could they do that?
Yep. So, obviously I'm on LinkedIn quite a bit. Obviously getting into this role in executive recruit, I get a lot more. And if somebody's in Charlotte, I'm telling you 10 times out of 10, I go grab breakfast or lunch with them. If they're not, I'll give them a call on either the ride in and or the ride home, kind of understand what they're doing, what they're looking for. So LinkedIn, Matthew Russell, Carnegie Search at, M Russell at carnegiesearch.com. You could shoot me an email and then we'll start connecting, there, we'll more than likely we'll hop on a call, and have a conversation. And if it's, like I said, if you're local, there's a good chance we're getting, to me, everybody's got to eat. You got to eat at some point, so might as well have some eggs, bacon, and grits, or some good barbecue.
Yeah, sounds
So,
good, man.
I, yeah, good deal, David. Well, I appreciate your time, man. It was very enjoyable.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much, and we're
All right.
signing off here. Bye bye.
All right. Thanks, David.